If you've been a Dragon Ball fan for any amount of time, I'm sure you've heard at least once that Goku has insane plot armor. But I think the issue is the usage of the term plot armor, what people really mean by it versus what it actually means, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to break it down and see if Goku actually has absurd plot armor. To start, we have to talk about what plot armor actually even is. And for the most part, plot armor is generally defined as a character escaping or surviving a dangerous situation because it is required for the plot to progress. This makes sense, right? I don't think anybody would argue that plot armor in that regard is pretty necessary. It's a fundamental part of a story. The issue is when plot armor is unbelievable. It defies the expectations or understanding of how the story should work or how it's been presented to us up to this point. Basically, it's suspension of disbelief, which is something I've talked about already with power scaling, but it comes up again basically everywhere that people are talking about their criticisms of a story. Can you suspend your disbelief while reading or watching a piece of fiction and be able to continue living in that world, that fantasy, without it breaking the rules it established itself? So this is the type of plot armor I'd like to focus on because I feel like it's the one that most people are referring to, especially when they're talking about egregious cases of plot armor. So let's go through some of these iconic Goku moments that people like to bring up all the time and see if Goku even has plot armor to begin with. He might not. But let's find out. Let me start with the one I think most people think of when they talk about Goku's plot armor, him dying in the fight against Raditz, only to later be revived and back around again. This isn't plot armor. I don't know what to tell you, at least not in the way that people say. Obviously, Goku died. Great. But Dragon Ball has already set the expectation that characters can be revived by the Dragon Balls. It's happened multiple times in the story by this point in the series. So Goku being revived after dying for the first time ever, not a big deal. It really isn't. And what most people seem to forget, I guess, is that he does die a second time, and originally, at least according to a recent reveal in an interview with Toriyama's editors, it was supposed to be a permanent death for Goku in the Cell Saga, which is insane to think about nowadays, but so many people were speculating that the Cell Saga was an intended endpoint for the series, and we also don't know how the ending of the Cell Saga would have changed given it being the true ending of the series, because the ending we got was with the understanding and expectation that the series would continue from that point forward. The decision had already long since been made. But it is something to keep in mind that Goku's second death, he doesn't get revived by any Dragon Balls, even though he still could be revived by the Namekian Dragon Balls, and he has to stay dead for the remainder of the series unless something weird happens, which I guess I should mention, Elder Kai reviving Goku. I can see an argument that this is plot armor. There's never been a point in the series where it's been even remotely established or hinted at that a character could just give up their lifespan to another person so they could live at the cost of them dying. But of course, Elder Kai is a weird guy with his mystical powers due to him combining with a witch and due to him being a Supreme Kai, the highest form of creation god in the multiverse. So maybe creating life or giving life isn't really that out of the question for him. But I'd say especially at the time when we didn't know that Elder Kai was a god of creation because there were no gods of destruction yet, it's kind of pushing it to say that that was within any viewer expectations, and I could see how your suspension of disbelief could be cut there. What's definitely not plot armor to me, though, is villains being arrogant. Like, yeah, that's in character. As long as it's within character for that villain to be arrogant and take their time and be meticulous and torturing to the heroes of the story, I think it's fine when the villain doesn't just kill their opponent, right? Frieza could have killed Goku way earlier. He doesn't because that's in character for him. Cell could have killed everyone extremely early, but having a tournament was in character for him. And I think a big example of this being the opposite is with Kid Buu, who goes and quickly destroys the Earth, and they barely escape because of a teleportation technique, not even from Goku, but from Supreme Kai, both of which were already established in the story. So them escaping that fate on Earth is completely within the bounds of the story, and it shows what happens when a villain isn't just arrogant and going for ego plays when they go into a fight with Goku and the main cast. So I think villains being arrogant, you could say is plot armor, I guess, in the traditional sense, where the story is written in a way because it has to be written where the hero, generally speaking, wins. But it's not plot armor in the egregious sense, where it comes out of nowhere. I don't think there's an arrogant villain in Dragon Ball that's all of a sudden arrogant when he wasn't before. Now, I think this is a similar case with new transformations. Some forms have foreshadowing and build up throughout the arc that they're introduced, like Super Saiyan, Super Saiyan God. Ultra Instinct is actually foreshadowed over the course of a series, you could say. So all of these transformations, if they win the fight, they were foreshadowed to be the thing that wins the fight. I don't think that defies your expectations of the narrative to the point that it breaks your suspension of disbelief and it calls for, oh, he had an ass-pull plot armor moment. So many people call things ass pulls in Dragon Ball, but it's only an ass pull if it's really not foreshadowed, hinted at, or built up to, which a lot of transformations that win are. And for the transformations that don't win, they aren't built up to most of the time. Blue Evolution didn't win its fight against Jiren. Yeah, it wasn't really built up to that much. And of course, you have my favorite transformation. I can't even say it. And of course, you have Super Saiyan 3, which doesn't win any of its major fights in the Buu Saga. It does go on to win a fight in Daima, but Daima's canonicity is something I need to talk about on a main dojo video before I really give it any credit for doing things for Super Saiyan 3 in canon at least. But it does happen there, and it does happen in the movies. But Super Saiyan 3, in its debut arc, the Buu Saga, doesn't win a fight. Not with Gotenks and not with Goku. So I think that Super Saiyan 3 is an example of, oh, it wasn't built up to, it wasn't foreshadowed, and it didn't do what you'd expect it to. There was no real plot armor moment of Super Saiyan 3. I guess you could say stalling Buu is a bit of plot armor, but Toriyama could have written it a different way, as I've said many times, to have Buu be stalled without Goku putting on such a good performance against Buu. But regardless, in terms of the story that we have, yeah, forms that are built up to and have narrative framing, those are the ones that win the fight and create plot armor for Goku, but in the positive sense, not in the negative sense. So I see no issue here. Now, I will say for the most part, I've been pretty positive about Goku's plot armor in terms of the story, but there are some moments that are a bit more questionable, all right? I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna try to be fair and unbiased here. And a lot of this actually happens in original Dragon Ball. So you have things like Goku surviving the fight against Tao Pai Pai because his Dragon Ball just happened to be in the place that Tao Pai Pai shot. It was very lucky it just happened to hit the Dragon Ball rather than hitting, the rest of Goku's torso. And so this allows Goku to survive it. In a similar way, you have Goku versus King Piccolo, where his heart stops beating after their first confrontation, and miraculously, Goku comes back to life, and it's not really explained, at least not then. And that's pretty damn crazy plot armor if you think about it. Because it's one thing to have Goku get hit by an attack, but it happens to hit something we knew he had on his person, and it has this thematic meaning of like Grandpa Gohan protected Goku on his journey to find Grandpa Gohan, which ends with him finding Grandpa Gohan actually not in the form of a Dragon Ball. I mean, that's different than Goku just losing a fight, his heart stops beating, just so the villain will leave, and then his heart starts beating again. It's a little much. Toriyama's really pushing it with that one, and I can definitely see the plot armor allegations there. Your suspension of disbelief might be a bit shattered at that point. And if we actually go even further back into original Dragon Ball in the Red Ribbon Army arc, we have General Blue, who was about to kill Goku. He was about to win the fight due to his telekinetic powers, only for a mouse to randomly appear and save Goku and the others. It's kind of crazy if you think about it, how often this happened in the original manga. I mean, Goku turning into an Ozaru because the moon happened to be full in the very first arc, which saved them from being captured and killed by the Pilaf gang, is kind of plot armor. I guess it's like the least egregious of the ones that I've mentioned for sure. It doesn't break your suspension of disbelief because the story could just be written in a way that it happens to be a full moon, but it's really one of those things where it's hard to say. It's just one of the many instances in original Dragon Ball that kind of fall into this weird little category. And I'm sure you can include many other times where Goku's had his literal torso ripped through and he survives somehow just in time to get a Senzu bean or a heal, or in some cases not even a heal, he just flies away. But all of those aside, you have the plot armor wish from Dragon Ball Super's Granola arc. So I'm going to talk about the Dragon Ball Super manga. If you haven't seen my coverage of this arc, or you haven't read it, or both, you could skip ahead. I'll try to put a timestamp in. but I'll be brief. So we find out in the Dragon Ball Super manga that Bardock, inadvertently, wished that both of his sons would thrive. Now, the real translation is more like they would grow up well or something along those lines. And since Goku is saved constantly from surefire death, it does seem like this Bardock wish is being used to retroactively explain all these instances of Goku's good fortune in the past. Now, do I like this? No. Does it explain it? I guess. Monaito is probably strong enough to make all of these things happen, so Torombo would be strong enough to make all of these things happen, but it doesn't feel great, especially because it has to be explained after the fact, like way after the fact, like 30 years later. It's really, really tough to get behind the idea of this not just being a case of plot armor that breaks your suspension of disbelief, to the point that Toyotaro and potentially Toriyama felt the need to explain it later on, way later on. So I can understand at least those being cases of Goku's plot armor. Now, I will say, I don't think Goku has had egregious plot armor in any real severe sense since original Dragon Ball. And even then, it's maybe 2 or 3 times that's really bad. With other instances, actually him being really unlucky, like his limb being too short to win the first tournament he's in, or the van getting in the way of him hitting the ground in the second tournament that he's in, both of which being unfortunate circumstances that lead to him losing the fucking tournament. So you could even say Goku's plot armor is a little all over the place in original Dragon Ball, but he definitely has his most egregious moments there. Now, what I will say is people talk about the main cast and death in Dragon Ball and permanent death in Dragon Ball and how important it is for characters to die, and I agree, but the characters that die in Dragon Ball permanently tend to be villains. And the reason that is because Dragon Ball is an ultimately hopeful show. I don't like that Frieza got revived twice because it undermines, to me, the themes of the overall story about perseverance and tenacity, overcoming all and any odds. If you keep fighting, if you keep pushing through, there is a hopeful future for you to find at the end of that tunnel. And that's what Dragon Ball is about. You can't have the main cast die all the time, especially permanently, because it undermines that messaging. It undermines that hope. Now, I'm not saying there aren't instances where a character couldn't stay dead, right? Goku could have stayed dead after the Cell Saga if Gohan was up for the main character role like Toriyama originally planned. Vegeta could have permanently died after his battle with Buu, being reincarnated, and maybe we have a slight nod to his reincarnation before the end of the series. I think it was a fine time to end that character. I'm not saying that I hate any of his stuff in Dragon Ball Super. I don't love all of it, but I like a lot of it. So it's not like I want him to be gone, but I could see that being a fitting ending for Vegeta. There's many such instances where a character's story could end in death, and it still feels optimistic and hopeful for the future, but I understand why that isn't always the case, and why that isn't done. Because ultimately, when you leave a Dragon Ball story, you should be able to feel like you can accomplish anything, that a brighter future is just around the corner if you work hard enough and push towards it. And I think that's a pretty damn good message to have. So if it takes Goku having some plot armor for that message to get across, I'll take it. I don't think he has that much plot armor though to begin with. Anyway, that's all I have to say. See you later. How many videos have I gone without talking about Super Saiyan 3? God damn it, I think I broke the streak.